Yolotzin awoke in darkness so complete that it seemed to swallow every memory and hope she still carried. She could not say how she had come to this place. Perhaps illness had ravaged her, or a fateful incident had torn her from the living world. All she knew was that her heart pounded with a question she could not articulate, and her limbs ached with the pallor of a life interrupted. There was only the steady, unsettling sense that she should move forward, as though an invisible guide pulled her deeper into this realm of shadows. Time lost meaning in the thick darkness. When her eyes finally adjusted, she saw, far off, a weak glimmer of pale light. She followed it, stumbling over jagged stones and treacherous dips in the ground that threatened to make her fall again and again. Each bruise, each cut reminded her that she was indeed alive, at least in some fashion, despite treading in a place that seemed entirely forsaken by life. Her fingertips grazed walls of porous rock, and a damp, sulfuric smell drifted in the air. It was not an ordinary cavern. She recalled bits and pieces of old stories. The Aztec underworld was said to be a place of trials, each stage a test of endurance and will. Could she be in Mictlan, the realm of the dead, presided over by the skeletal king? The legends had always referred to that god by a singular name, Mictlantecuhtli. A memory stirred in Yolotzin's mind, of her abuela telling her tales by the flicker of a hearth fire. For most, Mictlan is a place of rest after the soul surrenders its hold on the living, but not all find peace there. Some must wander the underworld's many layers until the great skeletal lord deems them ready to pass on. Her grandmother's voice sounded distant, like a faint echo inside Yolotzin's memories. However, the retelling also mentioned that a soul could be challenged if it clung too fiercely to life, if it was too restless, or refused the natural order. Cold crept up Yolotzin's back with the realization that perhaps her spirit had not arrived here to quietly drift among the dead. She felt that unyielding heartbeat thrumming in her chest, a testament to the mortal life she had not let go of. She had to confront this place. If she did not, she felt certain her soul would linger in darkness forever, neither living nor finding the peace of the afterlife. With trembling resolve, she pressed on toward that faint glimmer of light ahead. As she advanced, it grew clearer that the dim illumination she had seen was a sickly glow emanating from strange mushrooms and lichen clinging to the cavern's surfaces. The air, stagnant and cold, seemed to creep into her lungs like a living entity. She felt the press of unseen eyes watching her every movement. Eventually, the corridor branched, and she chose a tunnel at random. She knew little about Mictlan's geography, only that it was reputed to have 9 layers, each guard a separate trial. But no map guided her now. A soft scraping broke the silence. Something was shuffling toward her from deep within the shadow. Her heart hammered. She grimaced, steeling her nerves for whatever she might see. Then, out of the darkness, emerged a shape. A wizened old man, hunched over, skeletal in appearance, yet draped in a cloak of decaying reeds. Bone beads jangling around his neck announced his every movement. Hollow eyes regarded her, their gaze flickering with pale, unnatural light. She tried to speak, but found her mouth too dry for words. The man, or spirit, looked her up and down, as though deciding if she were worthy. Finally, in a voice like rustling leaves, he spoke. "Yolotzin, child of light, why do you walk these paths when you belong among the living?" She blinked, startled. "How do you know my name?" He tapped a bony finger to his temple. "Your name resonates in the stones and in the tremors of your heart. You have not fully surrendered. This path is for wanderers who cling too tightly to life. All who come here must prove themselves in the eyes of the great skeletal king. But rarely do they return to the lands of the sun." Yolotzin's throat tightened. She asked softly, "Is it possible to see the sun again?" The old spirit's lips parted in something akin to a grim smile. "If your will is strong enough, you may face Mictlantecuhtli himself." If you topple his hold on you, you might break the chains that keep you here. But his domain is absolute. He will not yield. He never has." Her face grew hot with defiance. She recalled the warmth of the sunrise, the laughter of beloved family, the smell of flowers in bloom. To fling all that away was a cruelty she could not accept. "I have to try," she whispered. The old guide inclined his head. "Then follow me." "Yeah." They walked through twisted passageways, the walls glistening with dampness. Strange echoes wailed, as if lost souls cried from unseen hollows. Yolotzin stayed close behind the guide, who seemed to float above the jagged path, his cloak of reeds trailing ghostly patterns on the floor. She ventured a question. "Who are you?" "At times, a helper sent by Mictlantecuhtli, the Lady of Mictlan. At times a trickster. Perhaps I am both. You may call me Hueha, for I have walked these paths for ages beyond count." "Why help me?" He shrugged. "The underworld is more twisted than any mortal can fathom. If you are to have any chance, you must first learn that your greatest enemy is your own fear. I will lead you as far as I can. But after that, you stand or fall by your own strength." They continued in silence. Some time later, they reached a cavern so vast that Yolotzin could not see the opposite wall. In the center, an entire lake shimmered. The water was stagnant, its surface a mirror without ripples. A thick fog drifted across it, threading through tall, jagged rocks that jutted out like broken fangs. The air was frigid, and an oppressive quiet blanketed the vast chamber. "Climb to the center," Hu commanded quietly, pointing to a massive pillar of stone rising from the middle of the lake. "There, you will see your first trial." Zilozin frowned. "How do I get across?" "The water is not as deep as it appears," he replied. "Wade if you must, but be careful of what lies beneath." Though dread crept down her spine, Yolozin pushed down her fear and began to walk. Her sandals plunged into the water, and a biting chill shot up her legs. Each step stirred foul-smelling mud. She tried to walk quickly, yet the water rose nearly to her waist by the time she reached the halfway point. Something slimy brushed against her calf, making her gasp. She could not see what lurked beneath the surface. Determined, she continued, not daring to look back. Finally, she arrived at the towering pillar. Its sides were slick, forcing her to grope for any handhold. With careful effort, she climbed, shivering in her soaked clothing. Hu watched from the shore, unmoving, half lost in the swirling mists. Atop the pillar sat a small shrine carved from black volcanic stone, chipped and eroded by time. 2 braziers stood on either side, each unlit. As she stepped closer, a swirling shadow took form, coalescing into a large, reptilian figure. A monstrous lizard-like creature with obsidian scales and blazing yellow eyes. She knew from whispered folktales that this beast might be a Yuwatl, a fire serpent of legend. Yet here it seemed drained of flame, more akin to a shadowy wraith than a creature of blazing heat. It did not attack immediately, but circled her slowly. Its voice hissed in her mind. "What right do you have to tread these sacred grounds? The living must remain in the living world, and the dead must rest in the domain below. You defy this order." She swallowed and stood her ground. "I only seek to reclaim my life. Unless I'm truly dead, my spirit does not belong here." The creature hissed again. "If you would pass, you must claim the flame of resolve. Light the braziers with your own will. If you fail, let this be your grave instead." Yolotzin looked at the unlit braziers. No torch was provided. She knelt before one, shut her eyes, and tried to recall the warmth of the sun on her face. Memories of old songs, of festival fires, of the heat in her mother's hearth, all kindled within her mind. She breathed slowly, in and out, summoning the energy that pulsed within her heart. Opening her eyes, she placed her hands over the brazier. At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint glow flickered at her fingertips. Sparks danced, catching the brazier's dry tinder. A small flame came to life, quivering in the stagnant air. Triumph flooded her, though she felt exhaustion drag at her arms. She turned to the second brazier. This time, doubt intruded. What if the first was only a fluke? She felt fear of failure creeping in. Her breath wavered. Realizing the danger of her own uncertainty, she closed her eyes again and inhaled, summoning the memory of love, of laughter, of mortal passions that fueled her being. She touched the brazier, and again a timid flame rose from nothingness. The Siocoatl hissed, seeming almost pained by the sudden bright glow, but it retreated a step, bowing its head. Your resolve is stronger than the chill of death. Very well, pass on. The Siocoatl descended from the pillar and sloshed back through the cold water to the cavern's edge, where Huhue awaited with a hint of a smile. You have completed the first trial, he said, yet many more await. He motioned for her to follow again. They traveled a winding corridor that narrowed so drastically she had to squeeze between walls. Faint moans drifted from unseen crevices, as if the rock itself cried out. With each step, Yolotzin sensed her spirit weighing her down, a heaviness gnawing at her chest. Echoes of guilt and regret blossomed in her thoughts. Flashes of her past mistakes haunted her mind's eye, the times she spoke harshly to her siblings, nights she wasted on petty daydreams, opportunities missed to share kindness with strangers. She tried to shake these thoughts away, but they clung like cobwebs. With every movement, Mictlan seemed to test her devotion to life. She caught her breath, fighting the sharp pangs of remorse. The corridor opened into a wide slope that twisted ever downward, dotted by the glowing mushrooms that had guided her earlier. It was as if each faint glow illuminated a regretful memory hidden within her soul. At last she emerged into a second cavern, this one dominated by a swift river, its waters black and rushing. A makeshift rope bridge swayed precariously between two stalagmites. On the far side, Yolotzin spotted an obsidian gate carved in the shape of a skeletal face. The current roared below the bridge, its waves crashing against jagged rocks. Huhue did not follow her inside. Instead, the old man remained at the threshold, concern plain in his hollow gaze. This is your second great test. You must cross the river of sorrows. It nourishes itself on regrets, feeding on every wound the living have inflicted on themselves. Do not let it claim you, or you will turn to stone beneath its waters. She looked ahead, seeing how fragile the rope bridge seemed. She had no choice but to step onto it. The moment her weight met the worn ropes, a gust of wind howled from nowhere, sending the bridge lurching. Heart pounding, she clung to the side. Below, she could almost hear the river calling her name, mocking her with the bitter taste of unspoken regrets. Her mind spun as she inched forward. You failed to tell your mother you loved her before you left that morning. The swirling waters seemed to whisper. You once let your pride push away dear friends. Each resonant memory felt like a stone bound to her ankles, threatening to drag her down. She caught sight of watery shapes writhing in the current, maybe illusions or souls claimed by the river. Halfway across, her grip faltered and the wind tore at her hair. Her foot slipped. She let out a strangled cry, dangling helplessly from the ropes, the black water surging below. Her voices rose in cacophony. Fall, they pleaded. There is solace in oblivion. End your struggle. Tears spilled down Yolotzin's cheeks. However, she forced her gaze upward and whispered, I hear you. I know my regrets, but I will not be undone by them. With a groan of effort, she hefted herself onto the bridge once more. She focused on the future she still wanted, the sense of new beginnings that life offered. Slowly, hand over hand, she inched the rest of the way across until she tumbled onto the far bank. The voices subsided into a distant murmur, letting her stand again and catch her breath. Her nerves still jangling, she turned back to look for Huhue, but the old guide had vanished. Alone, she faced the looming obsidian gate. The gate's skeletal visage parted with a low rumble as she approached. Beyond lay a narrow path flanked by tall, jagged, bonesome giant rib-like structures that arced over her head, forming an eerie tunnel. The floor was littered with shards that crunched underfoot. It felt like walking across broken memories. At the end of that bony corridor stood a huge, round platform. Wisps of ghostly light drifted like fireflies, and there, enthroned at the platform's center, rested the figure Yolotzin knew from legends, Mictlantecuhtli, the skeletal king of the Aztec underworld. He towered in a regal posture. His frame was all bleached bone, adorned with a crown of black feathers and teeth. His hollow eye sockets flickered with an inner fire that saw everything. In his left hand, he clutched a Mercurewhittle, a ceremonial club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades. In his right, he held a bloody scepter shaped like a serpent. Death hissed in every breath he took. She walked onto the platform, legs shaking, determination lodged in her heart. If she was to escape Mictlan, she would have to depose the Lord of Bones in his own domain. But how could the living conquer death itself? Mictlantecuhtli's voice rolled like thunder. Yolotzin of the earthly realm, you trespass in my kingdom. You grasp at life, though your spirit has been claimed. Why should you not remain here, as is customary for all who cross into Mictlan? Yolotzin swallowed. My time is not over. My heart beats still. I refuse to stay in the land of the dead. Your heart beats, he echoed, a mocking rasp amid clacking bones. Yet you were brought here by forces beyond your ken. If you desire to return, you must face me. Do you dare? She thought of her family, her abuela's stories, the sunlight she yearned to feel again. I do, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Mictlantecuhtli rose, his bones rattling as he stepped away from his throne. Then let the final trial begin. In a flash, the skeletal king swung his Mercurewhittle. Yolotzin darted to one side, narrowly avoiding the vicious blades. Sparks erupted where obsidian tore into bone shards on the floor. She had no weapon, only her wits and determination. How could she best him? He struck again, forcing her to roll across the ground. The impact of his blows shattered bone fragments, scattering them in a cloud of dust. She coughed, panic gripping her chest. She had expected a spiritual test, but Mictlantecuhtli was not merely a spectre. He wielded physical force that could surely end her existence here. With trembling fingers, she seized a shard of obsidian the size of a dagger. Holding it tight, she assessed the towering figure. She had to find a weakness. Stories told that Mictlantecuhtli demanded respect and offerings from those who entered Mictlan. He thrived on fear, on the acceptance of mortality. Perhaps his power waned when challenged by unwavering hope in life. Gathering courage, she charged. Her voice rose in a wordless cry as she slashed at his bony flank. The obsidian dagger screeched across his ribcage like stone against stone. Sparks flew, but she only made a faint scratch upon his glistening bones. He swung the Mercurewhittle again, forcing her to dive aside. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She attempted another strike, but he blocked with supernatural speed, knocking her backward. Pain shot through her shoulders as she hit the ground. The skeletal king bore down on her, raising his weapon high. In the final instant, she flung herself forward, jamming her obsidian shard between two of his rib bones. His roar reverberated off the cavern walls, and he staggered back. Yet it was not enough to defeat him. She needed another way. In the swirl of dust, she remembered the trials she had already overcome, lighting the braziers with the warmth of her memories, crossing the bridge by rejecting regret. This realm tested the power of her spirit. Perhaps a direct assault was futile. She needed to channel her living essence to subdue him. She stood, ignoring the pain screaming in her limbs. Raising her arms, she steadied her breath, recalling the feeling of her heart beating in her chest. Slowly, she invoked the sun's light as she had at the braziers. She visualized the golden rays illuminating the horizon, the radiant heat touching every corner of her being. In her mind, she summoned the protective glow of life. Mictlantecutli snarled, gripping his Mercure Huitl once more. Yet as he tried to advance, Yolotzin exhaled a wave of bright energy across the platform. The swirling lights around her intensified. For the first time, the skeletal king seemed to recoil. His hollow eye sockets crackled with alarm. He swung his weapon, but it passed through the veil of light with a sputtering flicker, as though colliding with something intangible but unbreakable. She pressed forward, letting this radiant essence flow from her chest. Each step she took illuminated bones that littered the ground, casting their shadows against the walls. Mictlantecutli's entire form trembled, and the edges of his crown began to crumble into dust. He bellowed in fury. "You dare bring the light of life into my domain?" She responded not with words, but with the unwavering resolve that coursed through her heart. Memories of her loved ones guided her, fueling the golden glow. The skeletal king staggered, bits of bone sloughing from his body, clattering at his feet. Dark vapor hissed from the cracks in his ribs where her obsidian shard had lodged. With a final shudder, he sank to one knee, the eerie flames in his eye sockets flickering like dying embers. Yolotzin approached cautiously, still radiating the warm aura. She could feel how fragile her triumph was, and how easily doubt could rob her of this fleeting power, but she remained resolute. Mictlantecutli's semblance of grudging respect glimmered in those hollow pits. The thunder of his voice had softened. "Very well," he croaked, "you have bested me in my own kingdom." Breathing heavily, she withdrew the obsidian shard still stuck in his ribs. He rattled with the effort of speech. "You have accomplished what no soul here has done before. Therefore the gates of the Underworld shall open to you. May you return to the light again." The platform buckled. Shuddering rifts opened in the floor. Yolotzin scrambled away, barely keeping her balance. Around them, pillars of bone cracked, toppling in a deafening clatter. A swirl of wind stormed through the chamber. She watched as Mictlantecutli collapsed, his once imposing figure dissolving into a drifting pile of bones. Shadows swallowed him, leaving behind only a faint echo of his presence. Terror threatened to overwhelm her. But amid the dust and bone fragments, a sudden brilliance burst from the far wall. It flared so brightly that she lifted an arm to shield her eyes. When she lowered it again, she saw a glowing archway shaped like the rising sun. Warmth pulsed from this opening, a stark contrast to the Underworld's eternal cold. She did not hesitate. Racing across the crumbling platform, she slipped through the archway. Instantly, the gloom and the stench of Mictlan gave way to a resplendent glow. She stumbled onto a high plateau bathed in early morning light. The sky stretched wide and blue overhead, and the crisp mountain air filled her lungs. She gasped at the sudden brightness, tears brimming as she finally felt the sun warming her skin once more. She sank to her knees, pressing her palms against the rocky ground. Life pulsed here, an undulating presence of singing birds and rustling winds. She tilted her head back, letting the sunlight bathe her face, heart pounding with both euphoria and disbelief. Was she truly free? Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes to see Hugh Huey standing nearby, his reed cloak shimmering in the brightness. Somehow, on this side of the threshold, his form seemed more solid, less spectral. He smiled gently. "You have done the impossible, little wanderer. Mictlantecutli's power over you has been broken." With a trembling voice, she asked, "Am I alive again?" Huey nodded. "Your spirit was never meant to remain in Mictlan. You only had to prove to the Underworld, and perhaps to yourself, that your will to live outweighed the pull of death. Now you stand at the doorway between worlds." A sigh of relief escaped her. "Then I can return to my family, to my home?" "Yes," he said, "but remember the lessons you learned. Life is precious and fragile, a gift that can be taken too early or squandered by regret. Let your living days shine as brightly as you have shone here." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun radiate across her weary body. "I will. Thank you." Hu inclined his head. "Farewell, Yolotun." He took a step back, and the golden haze enveloped him until he vanished like an illusion. Yolotun felt a gentle force tugging her forward, as though guiding her back to the waking world. She followed without resistance, her heart open to whatever lay beyond. She awoke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, her limbs trembling. Around her rose the familiar adobe walls of her home. Her mother started and rushed to her side, eyes wide with relief. She had been feverish for days, they told her, teetering on the brink of death. But now, as she opened her eyes, colour rekindled in her cheeks. She was back among the living, her soul returned. Days later, as she recuperated under warm blankets, Yolotzin found herself gazing at the sunrise each morning with renewed gratitude. She recalled every step of her fearful journey through Mictlan. Though she could never fully explain the ordeal to her loved ones, the inner transformation was undeniable. She knew how close she had come to lingering in the underworld's cold grip. Sometimes, late at night, she still felt that faint chill and the memory of a skeletal king's hollow glare. Yet she also recalled the moment she mustered her will and channeled the fire of life in the heart of Death's kingdom. That memory guided her daily, reminding her never to take a single heartbeat for granted. In the months that followed, she moved with greater compassion among her family and neighbors. She spoke gentle words where once she might have been silent. She offered help where once she might have turned away. The spark ignited in Mictlan, burned in her eyes, a reminder that life, no matter how mortal, could hold an unbreakable light. And so, though Mictlantecuhtri still reigned over countless souls, Yolotzin had discovered a truth. The dominion of death was vast, but not absolute. A courageous soul could triumph, if only for a brief, burning moment under the rebirth of the sun. And in that moment, all the darkness of the underworld trembled.